Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for being here. Thank you to Jan and all the other folks who have been organizing and working tirelessly at putting together these events and this program. Let's start. So anybody who looks at the current trends of the ecological crisis knows that we have big problems, no matter where we look. In fact, we could browse the internet and find lots of different kinds of top 10 lists or 15 lists of here are the biggest challenges, the biggest problems. Sometimes those are formulated specifically for a particular country or Asia, Africa, continents, Europe. So lots and lots of global challenges. We can find that information everywhere. And one of the common reaction that many of us have to this bit of overflow of information is frustration, hopelessness, fear, uncertainty. That's not uncommon as a response. The title of the presentation, this part, is Indra's Net. And Indra's Net is a concept from Buddhist philosophy. It was originally developed in the Avatamsaka Sutra. And the story is that Indra, the cosmic force, has created an infinite net that stretches across the entire universe. And at every intersection, every knot of the thread, hangs a beautifully polished, multifaceted jewel that reflects all the other jewels that themselves also reflect all the other jewels infinitely stretching over the entire universe. So Indra's net is a metaphor for the fact that we are all connected, that interconnectedness is a characteristic of all beings in the universe. Another way of talking about interconnectedness is the 6 degrees of separation. An idea that all living beings in the world are 6 or fewer steps away from each other. So by 6 or fewer than 6 steps of a friend of a friend of a friend, we can connect literally any 2 beings in the universe. American college students invented a game, 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon, that basically plays the same game by connecting any possible actor or movie to Kevin Bacon, an American actor, by the movies people were in. There are many other games like this on the internet, so you can go look them up. I have a different game for you to play though. Here it is. Captain Hart, Gene Popson, and myself. So here, we'll play the game. Right now, we're here in Providence, Rhode Island. But usually, I live in Florida, and Kathy lives in Seoul, in Korea. Let's look at Kathy. According to her English speech, I know that she was actually born in Turkey, where her mom and her dad lived at the time, which is why she was born in Turkey. I live in Florida right now, but I was actually born in Germany. And my dad has a cousin, and she met a man, Orhan. They got married, and he was from Turkey, and they moved back to Turkey to raise their family, and they probably met Kathy's parents while they were in Turkey. So, you see, Kathy is there, I'm here, but really, we are connected across 50 years, several generations, and 3 continents. So now it's your turn. For a couple of minutes, you play this game, 6 degrees of separation, or maybe fewer. Just talk to 1 or 2 other people at your table and see how you are connected. Of course, you're all sitting here together, okay? And you cannot use that you all practice Zen or know Zen Susan, okay? Those are no good examples for this game. So talk to each other for a couple of minutes and see if you can find a way. I don't control the volume, I'm very sorry. Turn me down with it, thank you. See how you are connected. Okay, go. So even within just a few minutes, we see that we are connected through other people in different places across time. And our connections grow and shift as we go along. We'll make more connections here that, again, connect us to people who have their own networks and connections that they bring with them. Some of the intersecting realms, some of the aspects that make up our interconnected networks are people in different places, food, resources that get shipped all over the world, language, art, culture, technology, information, and of course money. All of these are networks that connect to other networks, and they make up this huge web in which we all exist. Living in globalization means it's a small world. Today, we are more connected to more people across the world than ever before. Just think about your life today compared to the life of your grandparents or your grandparents' grandparents. Probably you travel more, you use more resources, but you also see more places. We live longer. We have a very different work life. We get our food, we get our entertainment in different ways, probably far less local and more global. We're not always aware of how all our networks change. But the networks in which we live always change. Imagine a net being pulled in one or the other direction. If you pull on one string, it affects change in all other places of the network. We may not necessarily know how, but we know that all of these changes that happen are affecting all parts of the network. So I want to turn to an example of this string pulling or this influencing of the network that involves social and cultural, political, and ecological aspects of our communities, and that we're all involved in. Environmental justice or environmental racism. We all know that as human beings, we are using too many resources in unsustainable ways. We take too much stuff and we put out too much trash and harm and destruction. If we keep this up, the system cannot be sustained. Right? We pretty much know that. Importantly, though, the cost of what we're doing to the planet is not being paid equally. People who are working on environmental racism are interested in looking at policies and practices through which less powerful groups are placed in more dangerous situations, particularly more dangerous environmental situations. More pollution, greater risks, more safety hazards, those kind of things. Now, if we are not negatively affected by a particular aspect of this, we often don't even recognize that we're having a part in this kind of an exchange. Or maybe we just have learned that it feels better not to pay attention. So I want to give you an example. If I only look at what is happening in my neighborhood, I may not know that other neighborhoods get their water from bad pipes, or that they live next to large trash piles and landfills that also contain my trash, by the way, that is filled with toxins and that contaminates the earth and the water. Pollution and other effects of our civilized world, or our modern lifestyles, especially in industrialized nations, often affects part of the world's population that we don't really know, or that live somewhere else. For those who are affected by this, living with this contamination or pollution can sometimes become normal, a regular experience as situations get worse. We have many examples where governments ignore existing problems. Flint, Michigan, in the US is an example. The non-reaction to the struggle in Puerto Rico after the hurricane most recently, but also in other contexts. I'm thinking in Malaysia, for example, the deforestation that, because of our desire for timber, destroyed the forests, but also the cultures who live interdependently with the forest. For many of us, part of our privilege is that we can choose to live a life that ignores or avoids the realities of this that nonetheless influence other people. So I can move to a better neighborhood, or by a really good filtration system, right? Not possible for everyone. Now, this doesn't work out in the end, as we'll see, because we are all interconnected, but many of us are pretty oblivious to how we are actually affecting people and resources across the world. So, struggles for environmental justice attempt to develop an awareness and keep records of incidents and patterns that privilege those at the center at the cost of those at the margins. And the goal is to develop concrete strategies of action, collective action, that considers and includes all people and all beings and the land on which we live. Now, one source of uncertainty that many of us have is that we don't always know exactly how our actions create an effect, and how that effect affects the next thing, and how that effect affects the next thing. We may have very good intentions, but we also know this principle of unintended consequences. Every action has a consequence, and there are also many different unintended consequences. So here's another example. We know that it's a good idea to conserve resources and to recycle plastic rather than produce more and more plastic because it's dirty and it's a problem to produce more of it. But even recycling of plastic is complicated. It may seem like a good idea to recycle that water bottle, but often the recycled plastic from the global north is shipped to poorer countries where it is processed, sometimes burned, and it affects the people who live there. For a while now, China is the world leader in processing recycled plastic. In fact, for a long time, American trash plastic was shipped all the way to China for recycling and processing to happen in small little family businesses and in big companies where they would process it to produce plastic resin that could then be used in other products. It's very dangerous work, both to the environment and to people. Often there is no protective gear for people who work in those factories. So the workers inhale the fumes and handle the chemicals without gloves often. And entire communities breathe the polluted air and drink the contaminated water. And on the bottom right, you see that a lot of children are born with respiratory problems. Now, interestingly enough, if this isn't bad enough, burning recycled plastic from America, for example in China, does not stay and does not only affect people in China, because it actually can come back to the US. So as an example, Los Angeles in California has a big problem with smog, and they have actually created some rules and regulations to improve the air quality, right? Very good. But at the same time, so much burning of plastic in China, for example, created so much more polluted air in China that eventually was so strong that it came over to Los Angeles, destroying all the gains that were made in Los Angeles air quality. So the question is, of course, who caused the bad air? Was it the producer of the plastic? The people who bought the plastic, who used it? The people who were responsible and recycled it? The people who gathered it up and shipped it somewhere else? The people who burned it? The wind? Whose fault is it? Of course, all of them and none of them. Of course, it's more complicated. We don't really have enough time, but maybe later we can talk about this not being about plastic bottles, but about a culture of disposable objects, or that we think we can live with these disposable objects, which in the end doesn't work. But we were trying to help. We have good intentions. Recycling is supposed to be a good thing. It's better than throwing it out the car window, right? We really do have good intentions when we collect plastic bottles, but there are unintended consequences. We participate in a global system of some people being able to live fast and comfortable lives filled with quick disposable options, and others who are having to deal with the threats of dirty food and harm to the health. Eventually we get to feel that effect too, but it usually takes a while. And by then, the problem is often so big that we don't know what to do. So what can be done? The serious problems in our current world, as was already mentioned, cannot be solved by one person or by one group of researchers. In order to develop sustainability in many realms, we need to work together. Researchers actually have known this for a while and work more in teams now and try to combine perspectives in order to come up with new ways of doing things. This is true for all of us. We all need to develop new questions, come up with different ways of looking at a problem, of asking different questions. And that sometimes means stepping outside of our comfort zone, where it's not our expertise, where we're not so strong, where we're maybe a little vulnerable, where we don't have all the answers. So creativity, courage to do some unconventional things is important. Creativity, unfortunately, is also something that we have less and less of the older we get. This image was illustrating an article I read a couple of weeks ago in the New York Times about a psychological study about creativity, where they traced how creativity changes as we age. They found that younger people, children and young people, are much more creative than older people. The older we get, the less we're able to come up with unconventional ideas. Children have all kinds of interesting solutions to problems. Very creative. The older we get, we keep having the same answers. We keep using the same solutions, even if we know that they didn't really work so much. As I was reading that article, I thought, I know what they're talking about. This sounds familiar. It's like, oh no. The open bird cage with all those ideas and birds fluttering around, that in some ways is like don't know. An open mind not get closed off with the certainty of answers, but engaged in questions. Much more able to deal with some of the necessary changes and options than those two little top birds in the closed-off adult bird cage. So let me, in closing, return to the 6 degrees of separation. That term was actually initially coined by a Hungarian author, Frigyes Karinthy, in a 1929 short story. The concept was developed after the First World War, when people tried to create a better way of organizing neighborhoods, better cities, perfecting or improving transportation systems. So even 100 years ago, almost, people were already thinking that the world was shrinking, was getting smaller, and we're trying to come up with ways to improve how we live in this shrinking world. Now, of course, the speed at which our world has been shrinking has only increased since then. Most people now are living in networks that are far more spanning wider than our grandparents, for example, like more geographic distance and other aspects of those networks. The good news is, according to this theory, we already know everybody. 6 steps removed, but we're already connected. So there are ways for us to take seriously that we can anticipate some of the ways we connect or interconnect. The metaphor of Indra's net takes this a little bit further, I think. Indra's net points us to recognize that we only exist as a reflection of each other. Indra's net in Buddhist philosophy is actually about impermanence and emptiness, right? But every jewel can reflect and exists only by showing the reflections of all other aspects in the world around them. So may you be able to pay attention, wake up, and contribute meaningfully to the big network called life. Thank you.